The following presentation continues the Mayflower story in late 1620. The Pilgrims have successfully voyaged across the Atlantic Ocean and arrived at Cape Cod. Now they must find a suitable location for a settlement. In November 1620, the Mayflower has arrived at Cape Cod in modern Massachusetts. We can see that Cape Cod is almost the midpoint between the recent colonies of French Quebec in the north and English Jamestown in the south. We will zoom in to Cape Cod. In November 1620, the Mayflower is in the northern end of Cape Cod near modern Provincetown, Massachusetts. We will zoom even closer to Cape Cod. The Mayflower is here. Modern Provincetown, Massachusetts is here, and modern Wellfleet, Massachusetts is here. It is November 11th in the Julian or Old Style calendar. The Old Style date was used in England at this time and by the Pilgrims. But it is November 21st in the Gregorian or the New Style calendar. The New Style date, used in other parts of Europe in 1620, is the calendar system used today. I will show both dates in this program, with the Old Style abbreviated to OS and the New Style abbreviated to NS. In 1620, there is a 10-day difference between the calendar used by the English then and the New Style calendar used today. The English monarch at this time is James I. The Mayflower has arrived at Cape Cod just 4 weeks before the winter solstice, the darkest time of the year. The Pilgrims have succeeded in crossing the Atlantic Ocean. They had established a legal compact, the Mayflower Compact, just that day, November 11th, as the ship had come into Cape Cod. If we take a wider view, we can see how isolated the Mayflower is from any kin. The Mayflower passengers are 485 miles from the English at Jamestown, and over 3,000 miles from Plymouth, England, where they last departed. As William Bradford noted, they had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses or much less towns to repair to. Enough Europeans had fished in this area that the place was already known as Cape Cod, and some of the Mayflower crewmen have been to Cape Cod before. But at that moment, the Mayflower passengers are alone. Supply from England is an ocean voyage away, and the Pilgrims have no idea how many natives are in the area or how favorable they will be to the newcomers. Cape Cod has shallow water, and sandy banks are a serious danger for a ship like the Mayflower, so smaller boats are a necessity to ferry people and supplies to shore. The Mayflower cannot simply sail to the shore and let passengers off, as this would run the ship aground and damage or even destroy its hull. Thus, the Mayflower cargo included a shallop, a small ship meant to bring the passengers and supplies from the Mayflower to the shore. The word shallop is related to the word sloop, another word for a small boat. However, the shallop boat had been damaged during the transatlantic voyage. The ship's carpenter will need to repair the boat before the passengers can go ashore. In the meantime, while the shallop is being repaired, the Pilgrims have a secondary, smaller boat called the longboat available that can carry small groups of people to shore. The passengers are getting their first glimpses of America. The landscape here is very different than England. Instead of a manicured countryside of grain and open pasture for sheep, the land here is forested. One of William Bradford and Edward Winslow's first comments about America was about trees. They noted that the landscape was all wooded with oaks, pines, sassafras, juniper, birch, holly, vines, some ash, walnut. The timber is needed. The Mayflower is out of firewood, and the late autumn cold has set in. Thus, on November 11th, the same day the Mayflower came into the harbor, William Bradford and some 15 or 16 men set to shore on the secondary longboat. The larger shallop boat will need to be repaired, but they have this other smaller boat for now. While ashore collecting wood, Bradford and Winslow note something interesting about the forest. They say, "The wood, for the most part, is open and without underwood, fit either to go or ride in. The forest is not wild, but almost manicured for people to move through it. The men gather juniper wood, fill the small boat, and return to the Mayflower. I have removed the modern development of Provincetown, Massachusetts from this map. Evening falls on November 11th. The Pilgrims' first day within Cape Cod comes to an end. The next day, November 12th, is a Sunday. The Pilgrims spend the day at worship on the Mayflower. The following day, Monday, November 13th, the small boat again takes passengers to shore. The Shallop is brought to shore for repair. The passengers have an opportunity to walk on land and wash for the first time since leaving England in September. The passengers, having been on the Mayflower for 5 weeks, are eager to establish a settlement. However, the carpenter needs more time to repair the Shallop. Without the Shallop in working order, it will be impractical to offload the supplies from the Mayflower to shore. In addition, a proper settlement site will need to be identified, something with fresh water access, open fields for farms, and good ground for defense. November 15th. While the carpenter repairs the Shallop on shore, Captain Miles Standish leads 16 men, including William Bradford, Stephen Hopkins, and Edward Tilley, onto land. The Mayflower's master, Christopher Jones, believes he has spotted a river a few miles down the coast. A freshwater river would be a key element for a settlement. Thus, 16 men under Standish go to look for that river. They follow down along the shore. After about a mile, Standish's men will have their first sighting of Native Americans. The English spot 5 or 6 people with a dog. The natives see them and flee into the woods. Standish pursues. The Englishmen pursue the natives for several miles until nightfall. Standish makes a camp for the night. In the morning, November 16th, Standish follows the native foot trace. The Englishmen are interested in finding a native village. A village would likely indicate nearby fresh water, which is necessary to establish a settlement. At about 10 a.m., Standish's men find springs near a modern trail called Pilgrims Spring today. The Englishmen drink their first fresh water in North America. Bradford said that this water was now in their great thirst as pleasant unto them as wine. Standish then turns south towards the beach, and the men make a fire there, indicating to the Mayflower crew the location of the exploratory team. Standish continues on, searching for the river. The English find a field. Bradford said it was about 50 acres, fit for the plow, and some signs where the Indians had formerly planted their corn. This is one of the many strange vacancies, signs of a recent civilization that the Mayflower passengers will come across. It's understood today that shortly before the arrival of the Mayflower, New England had been densely populated, but illnesses like smallpox or bubonic plague had already arrived with contact with European fishermen. It's possible that some 90% of the native population died in a single generation from these new transatlantic diseases. It's as if a society had been whisked away, and the Mayflower settlers will continue to find the recent vestiges of this civilization. Further down the coast, Standish comes across heaps of sand. The heaps are covered in mats. Materials are buried in the sand, including a bow and arrows. But the Englishmen determine it to be a grave, so they put everything back and move on. More fields are found, which appear to have been recently harvested. The corn stubble is still present. Winslow and Bradford note how many nearby walnut trees there are. The adjoinement of walnut trees with cornfields is another indication that the woods seem to be domesticated, as if the walnut trees are a farm crop themselves. Just further on, Standish locates a metal ship kettle, which must have come from a previous trade with Europeans. Another sand heap is found. Standish forms a sentinel ring around the heap, and a few of the men dig up the heap, finding a large basket of Indian corn, followed by another basket with dozens of ears of corn. They fill the kettle with corn, with the conviction that they will return the kettle and compensate the local natives for the corn if they should find them in the future. This area, still called Corn Hill, near modern Truro, Massachusetts, is near the river that they have been searching for. Just further on, the creek, called Pamet River today, is salt water as opposed to fresh water. More recent tide control structures have made this river freshwater today, but in 1620 the river was salt water. Nearby, Standish's men find another curious artifact of European make, the ruins of an old palisade fort. The men need to return to the Mayflower. That evening, Standish's crew return to the freshwater springs to the north and make camp. The next morning, November 17th, the men continue back toward the Mayflower. On the way, a young tree was bent over, and some acorns were underneath it. Stephen Hopkins, the Mayflower passenger who had been to Jamestown, told the others that it was a deer trap. William Bradford did not hear the warning, and he was snapped up by the trap. The English admired what they called a very pretty device. Standish's party continue on and return to the Mayflower. The small boat brings them back to the ship. The men stow away the corn that they had found. This corn could be used to seed a field for the settlement. Meanwhile, the carpenter is ashore repairing the shallop, and the men are making tools and sawing timber. The Mayflower passengers are essentially living an amphibious lifestyle, the ship their home, the shore their workspace. But it was getting late in the year, and the cold waters are meeting with shivering winds. Some of the passengers are getting coughs and colds. On November 27th, the carpenter has finished his repairs on the shallop. It should be noted that while the English old-style calendar is still November, the new-style calendar that we use today registers the end of the first week of December. Winter is arriving. The Pilgrims now have a proper boat to ferry people and supplies to shore. First, though, the shallop will be employed to explore the coastline and find a good place for a settlement. The ship's master, Christopher Jones, will lead this next expedition. This time, 34 passengers and ship's crew venture out on the shallop and the smaller longboat. Jones continues the work of attempting to locate a river, a freshwater source upon which a settlement can be built. The shallop and the longboat set off. Winter winds blow. The boats cross the harbor in rough waters. The shallop must harbor. The boats are drawn into shore, and the party disembarks. Many men walk on for another 7 miles or so, agreeing to be picked up later by the boats. Snow falls. Many catch cold fevers, but the Pilgrims make camp. A cold, wintry night falls. The next day, November 28th, brings more snow. The men board the shallop and sail to the harbor beyond at the Pamet River, where Standish's party had been a few weeks previous. Standish's men are familiar with this harbor as Cornhill is here. Jones determines the harbor suitable for small boats, but not for a ship like the Mayflower. The shallop lands near the harbor. The snow is now 6 inches deep. The men aptly name the place Cold Harbor, now known as Pamet Harbor. The men explore what will later be called the Pamet River. They secure ducks and geese for dinner. Night falls. It's now November 29th. The explorers return to the place where Standish had found the buried corn a few weeks previously. The men scrape through the frozen, snowy ground and find some corn and also some beans. The explorers call this place Cornhill, a name that sticks to this day. They promise to compensate the natives for the food when they should meet them. Bradford would later say that the corn found here, which he called a special providence of God and a great mercy to his poor people, saved the colony from starvation, as it provided the planting seed for the next year. The men now have significant stores of Indian corn. Some of the men wish to explore further to find the native village, whilst others want to leave. Master Jones brings half the party and the found food back to the Mayflower. He plans to return with digging tools the next day. The remaining 18 men lodge for the night. It's morning, November 30th. The men continue their search for an Indian town, going several miles into the woods. However, no village is found, but some burials are discovered. 2 sailors, though, had seen some houses, and they guide the party to these dwellings. Bradford and Winslow describe the houses in great detail, noting, "The houses were made with long young sapling trees, bended and both ends stuck into the ground. They were made round, like unto an arbor, and covered down to the ground with thick and well-wrought mats, and the door was not over a yard high, made of a mat to open. The chimney was a wide-open hole in the top, for which they had a mat to cover it close when they pleased. The local Nauset people of Cape Cod are an Algonquian tribe. A common house type among the Algonquin tribes are circular wigwams. The structural material are saplings bowed over, and the siding material can be tree bark or reed thatch. In this illustration, I used reed thatch because that is what Samuel de Champlain described in his trip to Cape Cod in 1605, a trip that occurred before the devastating plague had destroyed the population. Bradford and Winslow note how the houses were lately dwelt in, but the people are gone. In addition to wooden bowls, baskets, and pottery, the English find an English bucket with 2 iron ears. Again, the party has found more evidence of a recent native community that had previous contact with Europeans. Darkness comes early in late November, so the men return to the water. The Shallop has returned. The Shallop returns to the Mayflower as the sun sets. Night falls. The Mayflower passengers are at this time discussing where amongst the various scouting locations would be most desirable for a settlement. A key issue is to identify the harbor that will be best to accommodate ships, and which places might yield the best fields and food resources. Some argue that Cold Harbor, where the men had been exploring, is a good place for a settlement. Though Cold Harbor, called Plymouth Harbor today, is too shallow for ships, it is yet good for small boats. In addition, the natives had already had a settlement there, indicating that the soil was good for farming. In addition, Bradford and Winslow note that Cape Cod was like to be a place of good fishing, for we saw daily great whales of the best kind for oil and bone come close aboard our ship, and in fair weather swim and play about us. But there's yet another location to scout. Pilot Robert Coppin made relation of a great navigable river and a good harbor in the other headland of this bay, almost right over against Cape Cod. Coppin called this place Thievish Harbor because once a man had a harping iron stolen there. Enough men are interested in finding this Thievish Harbor that another expedition is planned. On December 6th, 10 men, including William Bradford, Edward Winslow, Stephen Hopkins, led by Miles Standish, embark again from the Mayflower. The Shallop departs the Mayflower, an intrepid party interested in a thorough exploration of Cape Cod. Winter cold greets the adventurers. The Shallop goes beyond Cornhill and Cold Harbor, turning in below modern Wellfleet Harbor. With the exception of some of the sailors in the party, the English are in uncharted territory. As they approach land, they spot about a dozen natives on the shore. The natives scatter as the Shallop approaches. The Shallop makes landfall. Standish's men build a barricade. Sentinels are placed while the others rest. The sentinels can see smoke from a nearby native camp. Night falls. It's morning, December 7th. The men set out again. 8 are on the Shallop and 2 are on foot. They move along the coast, looking for a native encampment that had produced that smoke that they saw before. Soon they come to a bay, which does have some fresh water. They find, beached on the sand, what the English then called a grampus. In 17th century English, a grampus is a whale or dolphin. The men all board the Shallop. They sail to where they had spotted the natives the day before. There, they find another grampus, which had been cut for meat by the natives. Bradford and Winslow describe the animal as a black thing, which might indicate that this grampus was a pilot whale. Thus the explorers called this location Grampus Bay, which is modern Wellfleet Harbor. The men follow human tracks into the woods, out of sight of the Shallop. They soon come across a large Indian burial ground, encompassed with a large palizado, as Winslow and Bradford noted, like a churchyard. Some of the graves have Indian homes over them. The men know not to disturb these graves. They advance past more old cornfields and find some native homes, lately dwelt in, but again, nobody was there, another peculiar sign of a society that had recently been. As darkness descends, the men come out of the woods and rendezvous with the Shallop on the coastline. On the night of December 7th, they made a barricade. These barricades were about 5 or 6 feet high, open to leeward, with fire in the middle. The sentinel watch takes its post. It's midnight, December 8th. Winslow and Bradford recall hearing a great and hideous cry, and our sentinel called, "Arm! Arm!" Muskets fire. Then all went still. As emotion subsides, one of the men, who had been in Newfoundland, explained that he had heard a similar sound there in Canada, and it was likely wolves or foxes. Dawn peeks over the sky. The men begin to carry their equipment to the Shallop. Some recommend, though, to keep their arms at the barricade, while others set their pieces at the boatside. They return to the camp for breakfast. Only 4 of the men have their muskets there at breakfast in the barricade, and others have laid their muskets down at the Shallop. Then they hear that great and strange cry. One of the men runs back to camp, yelling, "They are men, Indians, Indians!" Arrows fall on the camp. The 4 Englishmen who have their muskets ready take arms. The others run to the Shallop for their muskets. Miles Standish takes a shot. A few more fire from the barricade. Standish tells the men to wait to take aim. So Standish and armed musketeers are in the barricade. The others are taking shelter behind the Shallop. The Englishmen at the Shallop gather and prepare their weapons. 3 muskets sound from the Shallop. Because the Englishmen are using matchlock muskets, they need a fire for their match cords. One of the men in the barricade runs a burning log from the fire pit to the Shallop. The cries from the forest sound again. One warrior has a good position behind a tree, slinging arrows. A musketeer takes aim and fires. The warrior's tree cover splinters, and the warriors disappear into the woods. 6 Englishmen guard the Shallop, while the remainder pursue the warriors into the woods. While this pursuit might seem foolish, the English know that they are being watched, and the pursuit into the woods is a demonstration that the English are not afraid. This location, the first combat between the Mayflower separatists and the natives in New England, is still called First Encounter. After the battle, the men continue round the hook of Cape Cod, searching for Thievish Harbor. But the crew finds no haven with a river or creek. Snow and rain descend. The wind pushes the Shallop westward. The wind increases in the afternoon, driving the Shallop further round the cape. The seas become rough. The Shallop's rudder is broken. 2 men use oars to steer her. The winter dark comes early, but Mr. Coppin sights the harbor. The mast breaks, but the water guides the Shallop towards the harbor. However, this was not the harbor that Coppin had thought it was. The darkness and the rain had deceived them. They were headed straight for a beach. The men turned the boat before crashing. Finally, through the dark and rain, the Shallop avoids rocks and fell upon a place of sandy ground. Night falls. A cold rain falls through the night. Morning, December 9th. Standish's men walk the land and discover it is an island. There are no inhabitants. John Clark, one of the crewmen, had been the first on the island, and the island today remains known as Clark's Island. If we take a wider look, we can see that this intrepid journey through snow and rain led the Shallop round the whole coastline of Cape Cod to near the mainland. The Shallop is on the opposite side of the bay from the Mayflower. We will zoom back into the Shallop at Clark Island. Clark's Island is here. The Shallop is here. We can see that the Shallop crew have made their way into the large natural harbor. The next day is December 10th, the Sabbath, and the men rest on Clark's Island. On Monday, December 11th, the Englishmen cross over from the island to the mainland. Bradford and Winslow note that they had found diverse cornfields and little running brooks, a place very good for situation. The men sound the harbor and found it fit for shipping. The stone that is known today as Plymouth Rock is here. Bradford and Winslow do not mention the stone in their work, but it has nevertheless maintained a long oral tradition that its position is worth noting here. Again, there are fields of corn, but no native village. However, the Pilgrims agree with the previous occupants that this harbor is a good harbor for a village. The English have found a good place to settle. Night falls. It's December 12th. The men board the Shallop and sail back across Cape Cod Bay, heading for the Mayflower, excited to bear their good news. The men safely return to the Mayflower at Cape Cod. It's now December 15th. For many on the continent of Europe, in the nations utilizing the Gregorian calendar, it's Christmas Day. But for the English here on the Julian calendar, Christmas is still 10 days off. Miles Standish's men have convinced the Mayflower crew to sail for the newly discovered harbor across the way. The Mayflower pulls anchor. After nearly 5 weeks at anchor in Cape Cod, the ship has set to sailing again, but the winds are unfavorable for westward travel. However, the next day, December 16th, the winds fill the sails and the Mayflower cruises west. The ship navigates westward across the Bay of Cape Cod. The newly found harbor comes into view. The Mayflower sets anchor within the harbor. The passengers see this new harbor, which they soon will call Plymouth, for the first time. The harbor is bountiful, yielding cod, herring, mussels, crabs, lobsters, and a host of other water foods. In addition, the landscape is heavily wooded, providing the timber supplies needed to construct a village. Bradford and Winslow note an innumerable store of fowl. Standish and his men already know from their previous exploration that the island here, Clark's Island, is uninhabited, a good source of protected timber, and a defensible position in the event of an emergency. Meanwhile, on the mainland, just behind Plymouth Rock, rises a defensible hill here. December 18th. The Mayflower's captain, Christopher Jones, some of his sailors, and the previous discoverers from Standish's group board the Shallop and go to land. They explore the coastline and venture into the woods, finding all the indications of a native community, with fields of corn and abundance of walnut trees, oak trees, cherry trees, and plum trees that provide fruit. I have modified the satellite map to remove much of the modern development in Plymouth, Massachusetts, so that it better fits the environment of 1620, and then it is colored for winter. The Shallop crew under Christopher Jones explores the harbor, but yet again, no person or house is found. While there is no navigable river leading into the interior, there are several freshwater brooks. Thus, the Pilgrims have found a safe harbor with timber, fish, mussels, fruit nuts, nut trees, fields already prepared for further cultivation, and freshwater streams. In addition, innumerable strawberries are found, as well as flax for cloth weaving and clay for ceramics. With the winter darkness coming, most of the men return to the Mayflower for the night. The next day, December 19th, the men reboard the Shallop and return to the mainland to explore further. Some of the mainland was used by the natives recently for farmlands, so the land is already cleared for agriculture here. They discover a large creek on the mainland, following just below the high ground. The creek is large enough for a small boat, but if the water is low, the Shallop would not be able to go up it. The Pilgrims now need to make a choice. On the one hand, the mainland has freshwater streams, a defensible hill, land to grow fields, and space for a growing town. The previous native village had cleared the area of trees, so fields were already prepared for planting. On the other hand, Clark's Island affords the safety from native attack. The recent encounter at Cape Cod is on many minds. Also, the colony's principal profit, as devised with their charter with the Merchant Adventurers Company in England, was to be profit from fishing, so an island community made sense from a profit standpoint. The explorers give the island another look. While the island affords safety and access to fishing resources, The island is heavily wooded, which would require much energy to clear for fields. In addition, the men are not sure if the island has a reliable freshwater source. The explorers return to the Mayflower. They resolve to weigh their options and make a settlement the next day. The following morning arrives December 20th. The men examine their options. Shall they found their settlement on Clark's Island or on the mainland? On this day, the Mayflower passengers make a decision that will foreshadow the democracy that they will plant. Not the ship's captain, Christopher Jones, nor the religious leader, William Brewster, nor the army captain, Miles Standish, decides where the colony will be. Rather, the Mayflower passengers vote whether to be on the mainland or on the island. Most voices sound for the mainland. Thus, the settlement will be on the mainland. If we take a closer look at the mainland area, there is that place ready for a town. Behind Plymouth Rock is the high ground that will later be called Coles Hill, which is suitable for defense. A large creek filled with fish runs near it, and some of the land is also clear of trees, as the natives had used it previously for farmland. Across the brook is more cleared land, more previous native farmland ready to be farmland again. Another high point, later called Watson's Hill, is on that side of the brook, providing a second high ground security position for the settlers. The first great labor will be the cutting and carrying of wood for houses. On December 20th, about 20 men will remain on land, setting up a rendezvous, while the others board the Shallop and return to the Mayflower. The men plan to start cutting wood to build houses the next day. The first principal building site will be the North Hill here, the one later called Coles Hill. However, the following day, December 21st, is stormy. Those on land are left in the cold, wet, wintry rain. During the day, the Shallop ferries supplies to those on land. However, the boat cannot return to the Mayflower on account of the storm. Night falls. It's morning, December 22nd, New Year's Day in the New Style calendar. The cold, rainy storm continues. On the Mayflower, the cold and the cramped quarters are taking a toll on the passengers. Mary Alderton gives birth to a stillborn. The dark, drizzly night of the soul gives way to a new morning. Finally, on December 23rd, the weather eases, and the Shallop is able to return to the Mayflower and then ferry able workers from the Mayflower to the shore. The efforts now are to cut timber and drag the wood to the building site at Coles Hill for the houses. The sound of English iron echoes at Plymouth Harbor, metal against wood. The workers fell trees until the winter dark descends. Some men will stay on land, while the Shallop carries others back to the Mayflower for sheltered sleeping. December 24th. The Shallop returns able workers to land, and the work continues on shore. During the day, the English think they hear the cries of native warriors. The men prepare for battle. However, nothing more transpires. The next day is Christmas on the Julian calendar, the calendar used by the Pilgrims. The people again ferry to land. Trees are cut, planks sawed. Wood is carried and piled. On Christmas Day, the Pilgrims begin to build their first house, meant for common use, a supply storehouse. At dusk, the men again hear native cries. Again the men muster, but again nothing happens. 20 men are left on shore to protect the wood supplies, and the rest sail back to the Mayflower. It's Christmas night, and the passengers enjoy water and beer on the Mayflower. Thus, on Christmas night, 1620, the Pilgrims take heart that they have finally found a place to settle. They have felled trees for house construction, and they are prepared to make their new home in America. In the dark, wintry rain of Christmas Day, 1620, at Plymouth Harbor, the Pilgrims have found the place that will be their home.